everyone. So on behalf of Risk New Zealand, welcome. Welcome to webinar, lunchtime webinar today. We've got a few people running around because of the weather in New Zealand today. So we've got Denise on the line from Risk New Zealand. David Turner may join, but he's running around a little bit in Wellington, I believe, right now. So before we start and do a few introductions, I just wanted to, there's a couple of things I need to outline. So first of all, teachers strike here in Christchurch today. So if you hear tantrums, it's kids in the background. Ollie's silenced to the dog on his side, so that's good. Again, people in New Zealand probably realize that there's some weather warnings out today. So if everything goes blank, that's because we've lost power. Ollie and I will do a recorded follow-up if we lose power halfway through so that you get a full webinar. And then finally, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. So hopefully everyone can access the chat and just put your questions in there. We'll try and monitor them as we go through, and we'll certainly look at them at the end. So I think we've got an hour scheduled for this webinar. It's just gone 12:30 here in Christchurch. And we'll try and get this wrapped up in probably about 30 to 40 minutes, Ollie, and we will then have time for some questions. So yeah, like I said, I'm Martin Petts from F24. We also have on the line here, Ollie Law from Fixinc, founder of Fixinc, in fact. And we're going to be talking today about, are we already living through World War III? So F24, I'm from F24. Like I say, we're the European leader in crisis management and resilience technology. So, and like I say, Ollie Law is founder of Fixinc here in New Zealand. And really, we're going to challenge how you think about some of the nefarious activity that's going on with a question. Are we already living through World War III, Ollie?
Yeah, sounds a bit clickbait, right? And
Certainly
to be
does.
honest, it is a little bit, to be honest. I just want you to consider this, though. So the FBI Director Christopher Wray testified in January 2024 that Chinese state-sponsored hackers represent, he quoted, the defining threat of our generation. So it wasn't terrorism, wasn't conventional warfare. It was very much cyber operations.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're going to address this in the first part of this webinar today, why we think that we could be living through World War III. So we're going to talk about that in part one, and then in part two, we'll address a little bit more about what we can do about it as an organization or even as an individual, and kind of address how we may or perhaps should be thinking about this stuff. So we'll come on to that later. So I'm going to stop sharing because we're not doing a slideshow today, really. So, Ollie, people talking about World War III. We've done a lot of research for this webinar. What does that actually mean in terms of defining a World War III? What is that? What are the battle lines?
I've always been pretty fascinated with conflict, world wars. I'm afraid to say I've got family that have fought in World War II, and when I watched Band of Brothers for the first time, I became obsessed with history. So I've been doing quite a lot of research the last few years about what this kind of all means. And one thing that's really interesting that many haven't heard is that there's no really a single body or definition or anything like that to determine a world war as it's happening. It's actually in retrospectively or hindsight, you see these different things happening and you go, okay, yeah, that is a world war. So there are a few things that need to happen to essentially declare it. And one thing that we look at are those individual criterias. For example, the scale. So multiple major powers engaging in conflict. One might argue, well, that's happening today. We've got Ukraine, Middle East, US, China, Russia, etc. But actually, in terms of the scale of it and drawing in major global powers, that hasn't happened yet. You have things like alliance formation, so clear opposing blocks. Neutrality is nearly impossible. Geographic spread is a big one. In World War II, lots of different continents were in conflict through land, sea, air, that sort of stuff. The conflict needs to be spread across multiple continents, really. Um, Systemic impact, worldwide destruction, trade, finance, governance. Yes, there is a lot of economic issues going on at the moment, but they're not necessarily a direct result of conflict. Total mobilization, so nations repurposing their economic power and population to sustain a war effort. We don't see a lot of that at the moment. Look, historically, World War One and Two met those, right? And they were. It was a bit obvious as it was happening that that was the case. And then around the sort of late 40s, 50s, we determined World War Two was that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, but those benchmarks, as you've just seen, we're not necessarily hitting today. So there's probably something else, right?
Well, also, I think governments kind of explicitly said that we are going to go to war. In certainly for World War Two, you had Nazi Germany invading Poland, and the UK government saying, if you don't get out, we'll basically go to war with you. So I suppose we're lacking. Same with Pearl Harbor. I think we'll probably mention again in a bit with the US saying, right, we are now declaring war on Japan. So that we've kind of lacked that explicit declaration of war by governments up to now, I think. But as we'll see as we go through, what constitutes an act of war in certainly in today's climate and today's technology, I suppose. Um, so so yeah, I think we'll get into all that, but it's not knowing, like you say, it's the World War One was known as the Great War for a long time, and well, until World War Two came along, and now it's known as World War One, World War Two. So it's a lot of hindsight, like you say, that really helps define some of these conflicts. So
Yeah.
so what are the benchmarks, Oliver?
Uh,
When we look at a world war today, yeah, what's changed since World War Two?
I think the big one is physical threats versus what we now have today, which is the digital espionage and technological threats.
Yep,
If you look at Pearl Harbor, 1941, imagine a digital Pearl Harbor today. So cyber attack, basically disabling infrastructure. We do
yep,
see pocket examples of that around the world. You've also got propaganda back in the 40s. It was posters, radio, film, flyers dropped from planes. Now it's deep
yep,
fakes, algorithmic feeds, social media, those sorts of things. Um,
yep,
Technology is accelerating this kind of borderless bandwidth required attack on nations, right? And that's really where my focus is at the moment, is to kind of say, well, where do we draw the line to say we're in a conflict with another country or another
yep,
power? Because it was easy or easier back in the day because tanks and planes rolled in, and that's very, very obvious. Whereas there's so much cyber activity happening at the moment that those lines are, in my opinion, it appears to be getting blurred. And that's what this is about. This conversation today is we need
yep.
to be thinking a little bit differently about these so-called benchmarks and what is happening in the world, and start taking things like cyber more seriously and AI more seriously. I think we would probably do anyway, but are we calling it a world war? Not at the moment.
No, the thing that worries me a little bit, well, more than a little bit, is the polarizing effect of social media and the internet in general. It's almost like you either believe this or you don't, in a way. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories and especially with Trump and other governments, it's like you're either with me or you're against me. And if you're against me, it's all your news is fake news and all my news is real news. It's
Yeah.
kind of that, which almost seems to me to promote conflict. It's like, right, it's you versus us, whoever it seems to be, because that seems to be the way of generating more of a following behind your political movement. So it seems like that is only a catalyst to help. Help's probably the wrong word, but to propel everyone towards a world war, I
Mm.
think. So yeah, so you're saying really that the front lines are kind of shifting. It's not, you said just now, it's not tanks and people with guns and trenches and things like that. It's technology, it's network servers, satellites, all that kind of stuff. So what does this front line look like now? It's not trenches and tanks, it's satellites and servers, right?
Yeah, I mean, those are happening, obviously. Ukraine, Gaza, etc. That military force is there. What's
Yep.
causing the most concern from an economic standpoint is cyber, and it is that technology piece. So
Yep.
you really need to define what the domains are, if you like. So the first is proxy warfare. So this is third party conflicts backed by major powers. So we see that in Ukraine, Middle East. Kinetic warfare. So that's the most that's what Steven Spielberg writes about a lot, is physical
Yep.
boots on the ground, troops, artillery, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Non-kinetic warfare. So this is the digital or psychological informational impacts. And digital espionage sometimes falls into the proxy warfare space, but really that should be left for biological and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
AI then compresses into that non-kinetic space. So basically making decisions at speed and building technology at speed. And so really I'm focusing on that non-kinetic warfare piece.
Yep.
And there's loads of examples that are happening now, which is why I'm kind of saying, look, how many more of these scenarios do we need to happen to say, actually, there is a global continuous conflict in a digital synthetic landscape that constitutes potentially a world war? An example of this is 2022, the SITA airline data ransomware incident. That was 5,000 flights that were grounded for hours. So that's proof that another nation can ground flights, for example.
Yep.
We just released actually over at Unbreakable Ventures, which is a threat publication we run, that you're a part of as well, Martin. This is a co-created publication where we get multiple experts and subject matter experts involved. We pulled a story this week about how UC San Diego and University of Maryland used $800 worth of off-the-shelf gear to intercept unencrypted satellite communications. This was for the likes of Amazon, Starlink, even Walmart. All these guys had satellites they were using that were completely unencrypted, and they proved that basically, anyone with pretty minimum gear could do this. So this demonstrates how digital dependency pretty much equals operational fragility.
Well, I think AI is worth sticking on just for a little bit. So you're kind of saying that AI could almost superpower some of this activity, right? So in terms of scaling up, I don't know, the number of attacks you could do in a second or in a minute, right down to deep fakes and being able to mimic other people, and AI is enabling all of that, right?
Yeah, it's obviously skyrocketed. I think the audience today are probably mostly risk managers and in that space, so they're going to be aware of the risk of AI. What I'm seeing a lot in my work is that there's not enough education and understanding on its capabilities. So, for example, we've seen deepfake skyrocket in the last 5 years because it's such an effective tool, but also it can be done for less than $50 in your home office. Convincingly, by the way, this isn't something that comes across and oh yeah, that's definitely deepfake. This is being used heavily for propaganda. You may have heard of the Hong Kong CFO deep fraud a couple of years ago now, and that was with tech that wasn't as advanced as it is today. 25 million USD, I think, was stolen. In fact, we recently did a webinar or a workshop for one of New Zealand's top energy providers. And during that session, I brought up this idea of what could happen or what would we need to create a deep fake of their CEO. And actually, during the session, we created the deep fake or parts of it. I didn't want it to get into the wrong hands. And we were able to do that in real time. What I'll just do, Martin, if you don't mind, is I want to show a quick example of that. So while I've been talking, I've been recording my voice through a tool, an AI tool. Now, this tool, for anyone who's interested, is called 11 Labs. It's very affordable. I think it's like $20 a month, and you can create an AI clone of your voice alone. So I've just done one and created one.
So hold on. So you've got a recording of an AI generated version of your voice.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I've just done that while I was talking. So let me just try and. This could go horribly wrong, by the way. I could be proving to you how good deepfake is, and then it just doesn't work. So what you do is you you record yourself, it processes it for about 30 seconds, then you write a script. And this is what I've just done. See if you can hear this.
Yeah.
This is my voice as AI. This cost me nothing to do, and over a phone call, it would be indistinguishable. The tools available to create such outputs are accessible to anyone. With a bit of support from ChatGPT, you could create entire suites of manipulative actions for less than $100. Anyway, this is weird. So back to you, human Ollie.
There you go. So that works. That's good. Like I say, that's a really simple bit of technology. And so that was just voice that I was able to do in 30 seconds while I was talking right then. And we did the same thing for the CEO. The lesson I'm trying to get across here is that everyone needs to be aware of how more accessible this stuff is getting. So could you imagine what the likes of a state-backed Chinese hackers are doing and that sort of
stuff? If you get a call from your CFO, CEO, that sounds as realistic as that did, saying, we've got to pay this vendor today, or what, here's the bank details, whatever. I'll send you an email with the bank details, and you get what looks like an email from your CFO. Yeah, you're gonna do it, right? Yeah. Depending on your authorization processes, though.
Yeah.
I mean, this is good. So I was doing a bit of research while you were playing around with the technology. I was doing some research, and there was actually there was a similar thing that happened with Ferrari. So the staff, or I think the executives received a deepfake message from someone impersonating their CEO, Benedetto Vigna, complete with his South Italian accent. But that attack only actually failed because, and obviously reason for bringing it up, because of their authorization process. So there, I think the PA or someone from for the CEO asked a personal question, or asked a pre-approved personal question to the CEO, and that answer wasn't correct, or they didn't give an answer, or whatever it was. So they had the processes in place to make sure, whether it was formal or informal, I don't know, but they had some kind of process in place to double check. So they really stopped that deepfake attack because of asking that security question. And I think every organization needs to implement that kind of two-step verification process. So whether it's kind of a two-factor authentication, or even going down to authorizing a payment, make sure that people within the organization make that phone call, or make sure that 3 people on the board have also approved it, or whatever it might be. That kind of a process that means that you're not watching a video, attending a teleconference, attending a video conference, and then rushing off and doing something that you shouldn't do. It's kind of those red flags that we're all told about when it comes to phishing attacks by email, for example, where you're getting those red flags of urgency. So that email or that phone call is telling you to do something quickly. Standard kind of stuff. Unusual requests. So is this something that you get asked all the time, and this is part of your job, or is it something that's very unusual? That's probably another red flag.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Hong Kong example is that that was a sort of mid-range manager who'd been invited to a full executive suite meeting.
And asked to pay $25 million.
Yeah, it's quite I don't know. I wonder where that person is today. Is basically
but then again, you don't really want to blame your staff. You need to make sure the training's in place, your processes are in place.
Yeah.
But he might have been under severe pressure. It might have been a she, I don't know, but might have been under severe pressure to pay that money. I don't know. But yeah, it's those protocols, those kind of challenge response protocols that you need to make sure are in place. And I was also reading that in the first, and this seems quite high, but I don't know. The first quarter of 2025 alone, there are 179 deepfake incidents recorded. So that I don't know. I need to.
I think there'll be more than that.
Yeah, I think there'll be more than that as well.
Yeah.
But it did say that was more than the whole of 2024 combined. So that doesn't surprise me, really.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the cyber attacks that are happening on Amazon every day. There's a podcast about that. I can't remember where it was from now, but they're experiencing millions of independent cyber attacks every
Okay.
single day.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're not necessarily deepfakes, but the numbers are astonishing. China alone, I'm not sure if maybe we're going to go onto this, but China have anywhere supposedly from 150 to 200,000 hackers that are state sponsored, continuously targeting the US. And you see this from the likes of Salt Typhoon, which is quite a popular group that have successfully infiltrated US government departments. So the numbers are phenomenal, right? And the US don't have that amount of infrastructure themselves. They have infrastructure to protect themselves, but they don't have 150,000 hackers targeting China. No. So, like it's big numbers.
It's a machine, isn't it, really? I mean, I do want to get onto China in a second, and specifically Taiwan. But it's kind of makes me feel like we said, World War II, invading Poland and Pearl Harbor were kind of almost catalyst to declaring that it was a world war in a way. But, do you think what's happening with China and Taiwan? Do you think this could be the thing that finally that almost kicks it off, defines that we're all going to war now? What's happening in China? China and Taiwan.
Yeah. So there's a company called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and in my opinion, they're the Gdansk of our current times. So for those that don't know, Gdansk is in Poland. It was the first place Nazi Germany invaded. And TSMC is a single point of failure on a global scale. So 90% of all advanced chips come from a TSMC factory out of Taiwan. So they're powering AI. NVIDIA is their biggest client. They're powering defense, telecoms. Pretty much every electronic item you have in your life has a chip out of TSMC. So look, I sit here and I monitor and I watch what's happening out of China in terms of that intensity of potential conflict. They're mobilizing troops right onto their coastlines. They're really pushing their luck there. But really, I don't see it as territorial pride. I see it as they want access to what TSMC are selling to America and NVIDIA, etc. Now,
but why obviously we've talked about this in preparation for this webinar, but I don't, as someone that's in the business of risk and resilience, I don't see unless I go looking for it, I don't necessarily see this as a flag, as a red flag. It's like, this is a single, like you're saying, it's a single point of failure. Silicon chips go into everything, right? So it's going to impact my business, my organization, my supply chains in quite big ways. So why are we not hearing more about this?
I think we are. I think there are some stories happening out there. It's a slow burning story, and the news. I subscribed to New York Times the other month, and I immediately unsubscribed because everything was a breaking story. I was literally getting just notifications on my phone every couple of minutes of breaking news, and it wasn't.
I would agree with you. There's almost such a, and I think Trump is responsible. There's such a plethora of news about Trump all the time. He almost obliterates every other bit of news, I kind of find.
Yeah, and the thing is, TSMC and other parties are working to mitigate the risk to losing access to the factories they've got. They've got machines that are very unique to their business model, where they don't design chips, they really focus on just making them. But you've got things like the US Chips Act, where they're putting $52 billion of subsidies. There's alliances with Japan, the Netherlands, there's Stargate, Intel, Samsung. All these big brands are working really, really hard to take all of that risk out of a single point of failure like TSMC, like Taiwan, and put it into the US. But that is still a geopolitical issue, right? That's still tension. So if we take it out of where it's been for the last couple of decades, China know that the US is doing that because of what we just said, that they could potentially invade and have all those chips. And that's the risk.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could go on a long time. There's also things like looking at Guam, which is a place where the US would stage not an attack, but a defense effectively, and help out Taiwan. So you've got to kind of look at what China might do there. Anyway, that's kind of going off on a tangent. So energy, you read about AI and you read about the fact that one of the main things, apart from the technology and the chips that you need for AI, is energy. So is that kind of one of the other battle lines that will be fought or is being fought for World War III?
Energy is the single most important factor in all of this. Whoever holds the majority energy holds the power. They've got playing cards here. So, if we're using AI more often for malicious activity, then we need energy to supply that.
Yeah.
AI compute demand for the US alone is going to double by 2030. I mean, OpenAI, the biggest AI lab in the world, they're going to need 10 gigawatts of power by 2032, and that's the equivalent of 10 million US homes. You've got Microsoft, Constellation Energy, as I said earlier, that Stargate project. There's all of these big brands that are pulling like hundreds of billions of dollars into energy manufacturing and revival. So nuclear power is getting a revamp, if you like. There's a lot of these sort of mini nuclear plants around the US that they're putting underground, so they're safer and they don't last as long. They're pretty small operations, but they could then be used to power a lot of these data centers and the compute power that's required. So and China are doing that as well. I mean, this is what I was talking to the energy provider about the other week, was we need to be looking for these indications. Is China also doing innovations to build energy dominance? Because if they are, which they are, by the way, then that's an indication that it's like we're fueling the planes back in World War II. We're getting all of the bullets made up and all that sort of stuff. But in this case, we're doing it through energy.
Well, and I think there's, sorry, I was going to say that, and I think there's wider implications around energy, because surely if you need all this energy for AI, then the demand for energy goes up, the price of energy then goes up. And I know in New Zealand, we get a lot of energy from hydro, which may hopefully help, but energy prices going up are going to impact businesses, going to impact individuals. Did you talk about that with the energy provider in New Zealand that you were talking to the other day?
Briefly, yeah. I mean, it's actually that, and this is the key thing that I kind of always like to round up my talks on, is it can seem quite negative, but there are positive ways to look at all of this. And for this energy provider, I said, look, you are an ally to these organizations that need a lot of energy and compute power. New Zealand has good credibility. We've got clean green energy. We can be selling that offshore to these guys, and I guess it's difficult though, right? Because then technically, if we are in a cyber world war, then you're contributing to that. But it's about looking at the opportunities here, and yes, energy prices are going up, and they're going to go up more for these reasons. But I think using innovations to help just look after the AI compute power, then that's a must-have, really.
Yeah, and then we talked about it earlier, but I have then concerns about environmental concerns, really. All those climate accords, commitments that countries have made seem to be going out the window now, with China not seeming to have to adhere to any of them anyway, and then US now saying, oh, we're not going to do that either, because that then puts us out of it makes it very hard to compete with a country like China that doesn't need to adhere to some of those regulations that have been signed up to. So that that kind of raises concerns about global warming and sea levels and all that kind of stuff. And so even as a secondary consequence of, it might be in World War III, but then we're worrying about climate change even more as well. So anyway, so I wanted to, and I was kind of getting onto it there really, but we need to start thinking about how all this impacts us in New Zealand and what we should be doing about it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I would like to focus on, because little
Yeah.
old New Zealand feels so far away, and watching a documentary last night about COVID actually, and yes, we handled it well in a grand scheme of things, but there was this rhetoric that it's happening in Europe and America, it won't get here for a long time.
Yeah.
And we need to change that mindset. I guess the question I could throw at you here then is, Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland, business communities, it is far away from Taiwan. It is far from Ukraine.
Physically, yeah.
I guess the big ultimate question here is, why should we care about what's happening over there in those conflicts? What do you think?
Well, this is the misconception. Like you're saying, that geographically we're a long way away, but when it comes to cyberspace, distance is irrelevant, right?
Mm.
We were talking earlier about declaring war. What is it? What's the thing that's going to kick off a war, or officially a government saying that this is now war? And just last year, March 2024, so New Zealand, the New Zealand government publicly this is the first time they've publicly attributed a 2021 breach of parliamentary entities to a China-linked APT-40. So APT-40 is a name for an attack, a cyber attack. APT just stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. So this is kind of a new way. Well, not a new way. It's a way that potentially state-led attacks can penetrate networks and systems and look very much not using malware and things like that, but very much using Microsoft tools or whatever it might be to get into your network and just sitting there for as long as they need to do what they need to do as part of their strategy. But this was like I say, this was the first time that New Zealand had publicly attributed a cyber attack to a state-led actor, basically a state actor. And if they're targeting government, then these nefarious actors could potentially easily be targeting critical infrastructure. So these things are things to be thinking about, certainly as a risk professional. And it's, I guess, especially with the AWS outage a few days ago, CrowdStrike last year, I think it was July last year. These things are global effects or global impact. So they're we could talk about it in a minute, but very small things that seem to be affecting a huge global impact. So I think the AWS I think it was just a DNS problem, wasn't it? The AWS thing a couple of days ago.
Yeah, API DNS thing, but
Yeah,
like the problem, no, the opportunity with AWS is to get buy-in from your stakeholders or decision makers, your leadership, to exercise that happens. So, very quick funny story.
yeah.
We've written a really detailed scenario exercise for a telecoms provider in Australia. I won't say who it is, but you could probably guess. And we'd put in that exercise that we're going to get rid of AWS servers out of the East Coast.
Yep.
The client sponsor said to us, like I like it, but that seems a bit extreme and unrealistic.
Yep.
And then, of course, 2 days ago, he texted us going, okay, yeah, looking forward to the exercise.
I agree, but we get that as well. It's like, that's not very realistic, or yeah, that won't happen, or it's even, that seems too difficult. They might even think, that's realistic, but that exercise seems too difficult. We don't want to do that. But you've got to, we may well mention it again, but you've got to validate some of your plans. You've got to put yourself in a tabletop scenario, in an exercise where you're taking out some of these critical tools, these business tools. But coming back, to what we're saying about AWS and the CrowdStrike incidents, these networks are global. Your supply chains are global. Everything these days is global, especially over the last, since World War II. In fact, there's been mass globalization, and everything is global.
That's kind of the point I'm getting at. Is you know, the idea of a world war is a global thing, and New Zealand is far away, but we're very interconnected to this, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
I guess that's the biggest thing I always hear is, Ollie, that's a lot of stuff I need to defend against and mitigate and think about. And, it can get quite complicated. Where would you say that organizations should start, and risk managers should start thinking?
Yeah, well, I think there's two or three things we can do, or organizations can do. The first one's kind of have a look at your. I mean, I'm not an IT network person, so I don't know how exactly you do this, but make sure that your IT experts are looking at your networks and looking for unusual activity. So it's called these nefarious actors are using living off the land behaviors, and that's, like I said before, it's using Microsoft tools, using intelligent probably isn't the right word, but using ways of navigating and sitting on your network without being detected. Actually, I was reading something on the BBC a few days ago about because Marks and Spencers and Co-op in the UK have had several hacking events over the last 6 months, and last week they were saying, right, you've got to make sure you leave your camera on during a video call or video conferences or webinars or whatever, so we know that it's you. We can see your face, we know that it's a real person, so we know that there's not people sitting within the Office 365 environment, for example, gaining sensitive information by sitting on a meeting and getting information about what's going on and being able to use that in a fraudulent way. So I thought that was interesting that A, they're doing that, and B, that doesn't necessarily take all the risk away, right?
No, deep fakes are very much there to be able to do that, and I think the lesson I get from that is unnecessary meetings. And the bigger the corporate environment, the more meetings we seem to have, and they're all over Teams, and they all could have just been an email, or get people face to face, because it's really nice. Did you know?
Yeah,
going for a coffee with someone and
exactly face to face.
That's much. There's not a lot of risk in that, to be honest.
But I guess that's come about because of COVID, in a way, with people now working remotely a lot more, and people aren't getting together face to face. Maybe organizations should be reserving, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to be in the office, and that's where you have all your important, sensitive meetings. And then other days you get your admin done or something. I don't know. So anyway, that's the first thing. Have a look at your networks. Make sure there's nothing strange happening. Second, out of band systems, out of band management, crisis management systems. So and this goes back in a way to running the exercises and validating, like we're talking about. Take away Microsoft 365, take away AWS, take away those business systems you're using to run your business and to communicate in a normal business sense, because a lot of organizations rely on those business systems in an emergency, and the emergency could well be you've lost that business system. So it's not the best way of validating a cyber attack or an IT network outage if you're in your exercise pretending that network is available to you to help resolve that issue. So take it away, and have plans and have technology, and specifically out of band platforms that you can use. Out of band means that it's not in any way connected to your normal business network, so it's still there when you need it if your business network has been taken away in some way. So that's the second thing. And then thirdly, kind of going back to what we were saying about deep fakes and the Ferrari thing and the Hong Kong incident with deep fakes, have that kind of 2 or 3 step authorization process to make sure that you're double checking that before you transfer $25 million to someone, that it was actually a real situation that you should be doing that. So those are kind of some of the things you can do straight away, really.
You touched on, well, there's 2 things I want to come back to that I thought were quite interesting. The first is this idea of bad actors being in your systems. I actually listened to a Tim Ferriss podcast recently with a expert hacker called Pablos Holman, and highly recommend it. It's a good chat, and it's quite fun. He talks about the fact that most hackers are sitting in systems for months, if not years, and they're going completely undetected. They've got the data already, and that is because they're waiting to see if there's any value in selling the data or looking for opportunities to strike the hardest. And interestingly, the two biggest buyers of data is governments and insurance providers, which surprised me a little bit. But
well, the government's one is worrying. The insurance provider is probably less of a surprise. They want to be
I'm going to be talking to my underwriter about that, I think, just to make sure they're not doing that. And then the second thing you mentioned was the out of band sort of crisis management piece. And I've seen this a couple of times, but again, it goes back to that statement you said around that will never happen. You're doing a scenario exercise and people will go, AWS isn't going to go offline. So I was wondering, could you expand on that a little bit more? Like in practice, what does that mean, do you think?
So it literally means, I can't remember, but we kind of get involved with lots of reporting on how people communicate in a crisis or how they coordinate and collaborate in teams in a crisis. And it's usually email or it's usually literally Microsoft Teams or SharePoint or, where's your business continuity plan stored? Is it on a SharePoint server somewhere? Is it, is it all of this stuff you may not be able to access? So have it stored somewhere else on a different system. Have your business continuity plans digitized in a way that enables you to automate your response. So have task lists for people so that they know what to do and they don't have to email someone to get a list of things they need to do. Have it all prepared on a separate system that you can use in an emergency when you cannot access your Office 365 or your AWS or whatever it might be. That's what it means. It's there to use in a crisis, basically.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It goes back to, I'm a big believer in digital business continuity plans, that sort of stuff, but I will never tell anyone not to have a paper copy because those things have saved people a few times. So
absolutely. Yeah, paper copy, absolutely. In the office, even if you're a key person in a response, have a copy at home. You got to do these things. You've got to do it.
It seems pretty overwhelming, I know, and there's a lot going on. It's just like the speed at which the digital threat landscape is moving can feel to the person who isn't able to keep up because they've got other responsibilities that can seem overwhelming. So I guess the real question here is there any good news? Is there any examples of organizations successfully defending against it? That sort of stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always something you can do, and there's a couple of key things you can do. But I was reading US agencies have been very successful at addressing some of these Chinese cyber campaigns. And it really has kind of forced those, even if you do some of these things, at least it makes these attackers realize that you're doing something and it makes them think twice. It forces them to pull back, kind of adapt their tactics. I guess the trouble with that is then you've got to kind of keep the intelligence there and make sure that when they've adjusted their tactics, you realize what they're doing next because they're always adjusting, always moving, always adapting. But defense does work, but you actually have to do something about it. You actually have to implement some defensive tactics. The first thing, and I know we talked about this the other day, Ollie, but education. So make sure that you yourself are educated on what's going on. Attending a webinar like this is helpful. Attending other webinars, seeking out people that are talking about this stuff, and educating yourself. There's so many resources online. I guess you've got to, I suppose the main thing is making sure you're listening to someone that's trusted and knows what they're talking about. So education, understand. Go on.
Yeah, that's not always the news, by the way.
Absolutely.
I've watched anchors say the complete wrong thing. So it sometimes, I think, particularly with cyber, it's obvious when there's an expert because they've got a really clear portfolio, a good career behind them. Back with Pablos, he was a hacker. He has done some incredible stuff, and he doesn't need to do it anymore for money. So his educational stuff is because he enjoys it and it's fun. And those are the sort of people you want to listen to, because they will give you advice because they enjoy boasting about how amazing they are at hacking someone's computer, So
yeah, it's kind of good they can get away with talking about hacking and not get arrested. So that's probably kind of half the enjoyment. So education, that's the main one, but also invest in resilience, not just in prevention. So like, it's not just about making sure your antivirus is up to speed and making sure you've got a team of cyber defense people. I don't know. Make sure that you can respond. So, like I said, that if they're always adapting, you're never going to be able to stop a cyber attack. It's more about what you're going to do if something like that happens. It's having your resiliency there and having your response tactics there, really, and being able to get your organization out of trouble, basically. So those are kind of the main things that you can kind of do today to start helping your organization, education, and make sure you're resilient. I suppose that go on, sorry.
Yeah, I think the key thing to answer, like, are we in World War III? So my opinion is potentially from a digital perspective, and that might not be answered for 5 or 10 years by a bunch of academics that really review this period that we're in. The point is, when China tries to cause digital espionage to the US, they're not necessarily just doing that to the US government. And in fact, one of the most valuable and effective means is to do it to private businesses. Way more private businesses get attacked than the public and government sectors, because it's just so easy. And so whatever is going on a global scale, the message, I think, is that we are all involved with this, whether we like it or not. You have data, you have access to information, you are part of a cog. The third and fourth party issue is absolutely rampant at the moment. Australia have their CPS 230 regulation, which addresses this. New Zealand's pretty poor in that respect, I think. We don't have enough cyber regulation. And so we're an easy target. There are a lot of attacks that are happening in the health sector here. So
and it comes back to that. It's always that joke about there's two people go camping in California, and one, I think they're worried about bears and stuff, and it's like one of them packs a pair of trainers and the other one doesn't. It's like, why are you wearing a pair of trainers? You can't outrun a bear. And it's like, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. And it's like, New Zealand's a bit like that. It's like, well, it could be a little bit the easiest country to attack because everyone else has tightened up everything. So let's go for the low-hanging fruit. So that's kind of something to be aware of, I think. But I think in terms of World War III, obviously, as we've discussed, we're not in a world war in the traditional sense. So we're not, there's no trenches, there's no one's declared war yet, like the UK government with Poland, the Poland invasion and stuff that we talked about. But when do you consider something an act of war? It's like that New Zealand government declared attack by China. It's like on the one hand, you're being attacked by China, and on the other hand, you're doing business with China. So how does that work?
Yeah, I've been in a room before where we've had Chinese diplomats talking about trade and the free trade agreements, and then seeing on my Twitter feed that China has attacked New Zealand health system. So it's a funny one. It's almost like two separate departments. While we're trying to hack them, we're also doing trade and business. And that's kind of the point of this whole discussion, is it just doesn't look the same as what we've seen on films and in the history books. It's very, very different. Go on. One thing I just realized, that the poll we've got here that's set up.
I forgot about that.
So just before we jumped on the call, we wanted to ask the question, when was the last time you checked your crisis systems would actually work if everything else failed? And this is probably really relevant, particularly for AWS going out. So within the last 6 months, within the last 12 months, longer than 12 months. So the majority, 43% of everyone is within the last 6 months, which is great. And then we've got 29% or so for within the last 12 months, within the last, or longer than 12 months.
Can you display that on the results, or?
Possibly. Let me see what we can do. Maybe.
If not, it's not. But we're going to run out of time, I guess, if we can't do it. But
yeah,
just read it out again, if you.
So 43% for within the last 6 months that they've checked their crisis systems will work if everything else failed. 29% within the last 12 months, and then 29% longer than 12 months. So this instantly tells me that the majority are doing it within that 6-month window, which is what is best practice typically. Ideally, every 3 months to just do kind of mini scenarios or testing would be ideal. But to be honest, what I'm telling my clients is if you haven't got something scheduled in the next couple of weeks after what happened with AWS, you're lagging behind. So really
Absolutely.
Get on it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we'll kind of round it up there, but I think my because I want to just give 5 minutes for questions, but my main thoughts are really around this whole thing. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but really technology won't save you. I think it's kind of culture, awareness, education, and technology. So you need to make sure you've kind of got all of that, the right mindset, the right approach, as an organization, as an individual, potentially. Did you just do that? That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, leave that up. That's fine. But yeah, I think that's really interesting about that poll result. Like you say, 43% within the last 6 months. That's pretty good. Obviously, I'm worried about the 29% that did it longer than 12 months ago, but that's okay. But yeah, so I think awareness and technology are the main two that we need to really worry about. So I think I want to open it up for questions, but I think that's kind of all from Ollie and me, apart from answering the questions. If you want to learn more about Fixinc or F24, I'll put some information up in a second. If you want to talk more about this subject, then just get in touch with Ollie or me. So that's all I had to say. But yeah, Ollie, do you want to say a few last words? And if anyone's got any questions, please start typing them into the Q&A.
Or experiences. I think one thing I'm always keen to hear about is any case studies you guys have come across regarding deep fakes and cyber attacks, that sort of stuff.
We've got 2 minutes. I haven't seen any questions unless I'm looking in the wrong place. Let me just double check. Nope. So no questions so far. If you think of anything, obviously reach out through Risk New Zealand, or find Ollie and me online, and you can ask us questions there. Let me just share my screen as the final 2 minutes, and just so that you can get some information about us. So there you go, a couple of QR codes, just scan those in. We can make slides available, even though there's not much content in the slides. But if there's no questions, all that remains to say is thank you very much for your joining us. And yeah, have a good rest of the day. Hope you're not suffering in the winds.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ollie. Thanks.